Hi, I'm Callum Hawker, and this is my partner Johnny Tyconic, and this is season 2 of the Callum Tyconic Show. Today we're discussing the positives of the Industrial Revolution, and let's have Johnny start off here.
All right, we'll start with the transportation because it changed drastically and it's pretty important. The growth of the Industrial Revolution depended on the ability to transport raw materials and finished goods over long distances. There were three main types of transportation that increased during the Industrial Revolution: waterways, roads, and railroads. Transportation was important because people were starting to live in the West. During this time period, transportation via water was the cheapest way to move heavy products such as coal and iron. As a result, canals were widened and deepened to allow more boats to pass. Robert Fulton, made the first steam-powered engine to a power steamboat in 1807. He demonstrated its use by going from New York to Albany via the Hudson River. His steamboat was able to carry raw materials across the Atlantic Ocean by the mid-1800s. The roads also improved immensely during this time period. Previously, people traveled using animals or by foot, but there were many problems with the condition of the roads. In 1751, turnpikes were created for easier transportation, especially for the horse-drawn wagons. John Loudon McAdam made McAdam road surfaces, which consisted of crushed rock in thin layers. Thomas Telford made new foundation in roads with large flat stones. Soon after, roads across America were improved based on these techniques. The closest to trains were horses, commonly used to pull freight cars along rails. In 1801, Richard Trevithick made the first steam locomotive. Roads and railroads also made traveling safer and allowed goods to be moved more efficiently during the Industrial Revolution.
So moving on to cities and how they grew in the Industrial Revolution and how job opportunities came available. The Industrial Revolution saw the birth of factories, which started making many goods that people from the countryside made by hand. The factories made them cheaper and for mass consumption, especially textiles. People who traditionally had woven textiles at home, looms couldn't compete. Plus, these factories offered hundreds of jobs, so many people moved from the countryside into the cities for work. Factories employed over 300 people. Nothing had ever seen anything like this before. The domestic system only needed 2 or 3 people working in their own home. By 1789, the Cromford Mill employed 800 people, with the exception of a few engineers in the factory. The bulk of the workforces were essentially unskilled. They had their own job to do over a set number of hours, whereas those in the domestic system could work their own hours and enjoy a degree of flexibility. Those in the factories were governed by a clock and factory rules.
So now we'll move on to how the aristocracy was eliminated due to the middle class.
Okay, so the aristocrats are essentially the people in relations of a leader. Over time, leaders gained enough riches to pass down to children and onto friends. So power, privileges, and wealth were used to cement alliances, etc., as well as given as favors. Before the 10th Union of England, there were lots of small kingdoms. The population was tiny, and the land was mostly wooden. The economy was agrarian with some foreign trade. So the kings of each region ceded land of treasure to their friends, and there was slightly larger chance of getting rich this way. Then when there was just one monarch, and then it continued to get bigger as a tiny population.
Now we'll get on to the invention of the telephone. So Alexander Graham Bell supposedly invented the telephone. Bell's telephone transmitted microphone consisted of a double electromagnetic in front of which a membrane stretched on a ring carried an oblong piece of soft iron cemented to its mouth. As soon as the telephone was invented, everyone saw a great use for the new invention. It was easier for trade, communication, and it led to other great inventions, such as computers, many years later.
Thank you for having us today on the Callum Tyconic Show. My name is Ben, and today I'm going to be elaborating on Callum's idea on the life in the Industrial Revolution in the towns. So the Industrial Revolution witnessed a huge growth in the size of British cities. In 1695, the population of Britain was estimated to be 5.5 million people. That's not a lot compared to 1801, where the Industrial Revolution was in when it was growing. It was 9.3 million, which is a growth of 4 million people. And then about 40 years later, it was 15.9 million, which is absolutely insane. Manchester, as an example, experienced 6 times the increase in its population between 1771 and 1831. As enclosure and technical developments in farming had reduced and the need for people to work in the farmland stopped, many people moved to the cities to get a job. These cities were not prepared for such a big demand in housing, so they had to start building cheap houses fast. There were few building regulations at the time, and most of them were frequently ignored. So they knew people that needed a job had to live somewhere. Therefore, their houses were put up fast and cheap. There were many as built as possible so people could live in the cities, not out in the country. The Industrial Revolution saw the start of what was known as back-to-back terrace housing. These had no garden and were the part of the building not connected to the other house but only at the front entrance. In Nottingham, out of a total 11,000 homes in the 1840s, 7,000 were back-to-back. The building material was the cheapest the builder could find. Cheap slate from Wales was commonly used. The finished homes were damp, as none were built with damp courses, and those could only afford cellar dwellings lived in the worst possible conditions, as damp moisture would seep through the lowest part of the home. None of these homes was built with a bathroom, toilet, or running water. You either washed in a tin bath in the home with the water collected from the local pump, or you simply did not bathe. Many didn't wash as it was simply easier. There would be a courtyard between each row of terraces. Waste of all sorts from the homes was thrown into the courtyard, and so-called nightmen picked the waste up and disposed of it in the river. As you can tell, there wasn't many good conditions in the Industrial Revolution, and now I want to pass it on to Kaylee to talk about.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the inventions that were created in the Industrial Revolution. The first one was the steam engine, which was invented in 1712. After that was the spinning jenny in 1764 by James Hargreaves. And then James Watt improved the steam engine in 1769. Then Ellie Whitney created the cotton gin in 1794. Samuel Morse invented the telegraph in 1844. Elias Howe invented the sewing machine in 1846. Alfred Nobel created dynamite in 1866. Louis Pasteur developed vaccines for new diseases in 1870. Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone in 1876. Thomas Edison used a light bulb to light a lamp for the first time in 1879. Orville Wright makes the first powered airplane take off in 1903, and Henry Ford created the first Model T car in 1908. Ben?
Thank you for having us on the show. I'd like to pass it to Harper Sina, and he won now. Thank you.
Wait, I still have my point.
Oh.
During the Industrial Revolution, many goods were in high demand and the skilled craft workers making these couldn't keep up with the high demand. Because of this, many machines were introduced to improve the rate of production. With the combination of both the skilled workers and the machines, the productions became very efficient and organized when making the mass production.
Mass production just didn't benefit the middle class that worked in the factories, but it also affected advertising, market research, and transportation. During the Industrial Revolution, many people moved out of the countryside and into the city. Because of this, standards of living were raised. As a result of mass production, there was an increase of quality of life.
How did the Industrial Revolution generate wealth? During the Industrial Revolution, the creation of wealth was so successful because the emphasis on privately owned property and the free market system. People grew their money by investing and inventing more advanced machines. The demand for machines skyrocketed, which allowed the inventors to sell it for a higher price. Inventions took over workplaces in factories, which saved factories money because they didn't have to pay as many workers. These machines could mass produce materials, which were then traded and sold to other countries, which increased the wealth of the entire country. During the Industrial Revolution, citizens gained more freedom and independence. Although it was a rough time, for most, they had the opportunity to do what they wanted.
Thank you for having us on the Callum Tectonic Show.
No problem, no problem.
My pleasure.
So that concludes season 2, and hopefully we'll have season 3. Thank you.
Stay concluded. Thank you.
Stay concluded?